Welcome to section 4, the last section of module 1 in the curriculum globALE. Like the previous sections, also this is divided into 3 parts. Part 1, this part, is about adult education as a profession. Part 2 explores some of the competencies needed to be a good adult educator. And part 3 is all about reflecting on parts 1 and 2 here before moving on to the next section. Adult education as a profession, then. First off, let me state what is maybe obvious. Without adult educators, there can be no adult education. I mean, sure, we can learn from life and each other, but most of this learning will be haphazard and governed by chance, if you ask me. Earlier, I suggested we always put the learner in the center, not the system, the funders, society, donors, nor decision makers. All we do should be for the good of the learner, the benefit of the learner. Let us keep that in mind when we turn to look at the adult educator. I think the education system in your country will have a decisive impact on the role, status, and function of you as an adult educator. I talked some about that in the previous video. If you have a fairly developed system with allocated funding, up-to-date legislation, and regular provision of adult education in place, it is also quite likely that your status as adult educator in society is higher than if the majority of adult education takes place outside of the formal system in your country. That is to say, the official status. With it comes recognition and place in society. Some may say this does not matter. I have heard many claim the work of an adult educator is a kind of calling, much like it is, for example, for priests in Christian countries. In a sense, I understand and maybe even agree to a part. In my experience, this is not a type of work that begins in the morning and ends in the afternoon. But I also disagree. I would lie if I said I think about my work all the time. But it is certainly on my mind quite often. That is not a requirement. You can be a perfectly well-functioning adult educator 9 to 5 and leave it at that. It is not for me to say how you live your life, and neither is it for your employer, the state, or society at large, as long as you fulfill your duties. But of course it helps if you're interested to learn more, to understand more, to improve your teaching. This, then, is a question of attitude and life situation. In itself, that does not really depend on the country you live in. You can approach this as a job regardless of if you have a well-established education system or a less developed one. And you can likewise be personally interested and ready to invest yourself regardless of the system. It is how you are perceived and accepted that will depend on the level of development your country is in. This aspect, then, your approach, is up to you. It is about attitude, personality, ambition. By the way, this is not a static thing. When I started out in adult education, it was a job to me, something that paid my rent and bills. Then, gradually, over the years, I have become more interested, more engaged. The bottom line is, this part of having adult education as a profession is deeply personal. For me, putting myself in the shoes of the learner has helped me grow, learn new things, and hopefully also become a better adult educator. And if you, like me, live in a country where adult education is popular and generally supported, you rarely need to defend your career choices or the importance of adult education in society. Adult education here is established and accepted. The flip side of that is that adult education is institutionalized and there is a way to do things. Change, then, can be slow, and when you are starting out as an adult educator, it may also feel a bit intimidating. The history, the weight. Also, even in non-formal adult education, where I mostly work, there is a heavy emphasis on formal training of teachers, in spite of our work field. In other words, it may not be as free as it sets out to be. I don't think this is a problem, just an example of the complexity within adult education. Some Eastern European countries, like for example Serbia, Macedonia, Slovenia, have over 50 years of tradition in developing adult education as a profession. Yes, I am talking about andragogs. Now, I mentioned the word and shortly about its meaning in a previous video where I also talked about the history, but a short recap. An andragog is a professional who works in all the fields of adult education. To become one, you first need to complete undergraduate studies at university level. Some other European countries have a different understanding about adult education as a profession. This we can see reflected in the many names or titles used. We have, for example, trainers, teachers, facilitators, moderators, and more. In most cases, you need to complete formal or non-formal training on a post-secondary and/or university level. However, there are also a lot of adult educators in, for example, Finland that has no teacher qualifications, so the picture is not black and white. Given that, what then can we say about adult education as a profession? Well, we can say you can become one in very many different ways. We can also say your role and self-image may change and develop over time. To some, this is a lifestyle. To others, it is a job. If you work through an NGO, association or similar, you may connect your work with other topics like democracy, sustainability or the like. That may also affect how you understand your role. It's possible, for example, you consider adult education a useful tool to accomplish other goals. That's fine. Just be aware of this and careful not to forget we are there for the learners, not the other way around. The learner in the center, remember? I am fond of discussing what we often call the hidden agenda. That means I think the methods used when I teach are as important as the output, the content. By carefully selecting methods that support co-creation and utilizes the experience and expectations of the learners, the group, for example, I'm also building democracy and tolerance. This, for me, is also part of my identity as an adult educator. Now, I would like to think I am putting the learner in the center when I work. That does not mean I am invisible. It just means I try to focus more on learning outcomes than on learning objectives. Now, let's make a list of the competencies you need in order to be a good adult educator. Yeah, I know you may have questions and maybe you take issue with what I have claimed in this part, but hold your horses, wait for section 3 before you unleash your many thoughts on this.